Let me ask you a question. If your portfolio made 25% last year, would you be happy? Most people would say yes. But what if I told you that the same portfolio could drop 50% the next year and turn $1 million into 500,000? That 25% doesn't feel so great anymore, does it? Here's the problem. Most investors are focusing on the wrong number because return on its own doesn't tell the full story. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to properly evaluate your investment portfolio like the pros do by looking at risk, return, and cost all together in one package. And once you see this, you're never going to look at your portfolio the same way again. If I gave you two portfolios, portfolio A and portfolio B, both return 10% per year on average, which one would you pick? Well, it sounds like a little bit like a trick question, I know. But they both did 10%. They both did the same thing. But let's add one more piece of information. Portfolio A earned 10% with very little volatility, very smooth ride. Portfolio B earned 10%, but with like a roller coaster of returns, big ups, big downs. Now, which one are you choosing? Exactly. Portfolio A, because if the outcomes are the same, why would you take on more risk to get there? The only time risk makes sense is when you're being paid for it. And that's the point. Risk matters, not just the return that you earn, but what you had to go through to earn it. Because large drawdowns, volatility, those aren't just numbers on a chart. They affect how you feel. They affect the decisions that you make. And ultimately, they affect whether you actually stay invested long enough to achieve that return. We need to understand the risk that was taken to achieve that return, because that's what tells us whether a portfolio is actually right for you. So let's actually look at what this means in real life. What I've done here is I've selected 4 different portfolios, 1 conservative, 2 balanced portfolios, and 1 aggressive portfolio. I picked 2 balanced portfolios intentionally because most people assume that if 2 portfolios are labeled the same, like balanced, they should behave the same way. But that's not always true. Let's start with what everyone looks at first, return. If you look at these 4 portfolios, you'll notice something right away. The aggressive portfolio logically has higher returns over time. What's surprising is that the balanced Y portfolio is actually doing worse than the conservative one. And the balanced X portfolio sits somewhere in between the performance of the conservative and the aggressive portfolio. But this is where most people stop their analysis, and that's a mistake. Because if return is the only thing that matters, then everyone would be aggressive because it has performed the best over that period. So let's add something much more important, drawdowns. A drawdown is simply how much your portfolio falls from its peak to its lowest point during a decline. In other words, when markets go down, how far down do you go? Drawdowns are important because when markets are going up, well, no one's worried. But when markets are going to drop or when markets go down, that's when people start to feel it. The stress, the doubt, the worry, it all kicks in. And that's when people make decisions that they ultimately regret. This graph shows us, over a common since inception period, how each portfolio behaved when markets got difficult. Periods like the 2022 interest rate crisis and the 2025 Trump tariff announcements. Look at how much the aggressive portfolio drops compared to the conservative portfolio. Minus 13.34% downturn in 2022 for the aggressive portfolio compared to minus 7.79 for the conservative one. I mean, that's not just a number, that's real money. $1 million drops to $886,600 with the aggressive portfolio and $922,100 for the conservative one. Keep in mind that it's not just positive returns that test you, it's actually the drawdowns that test you. Let's look at these 2 balanced portfolios. They're both labeled balanced, yet they have very different experiences. One drops significantly more than the other in 2022. They're not delivering the same ride or the same experience for investors. Now, before we go any further, I want to make this very simple. Let's say your portfolio grows at an average of 8% per year. If that return was perfectly smooth, it would look like a straight line. This blue line here, for example. But in reality, that's not how investing works. Returns move up and down around the average. This would be a portfolio with lower volatility, a smoother ride, peace of mind. And this would be a portfolio with higher volatility, bigger swings, more uncertainty along the way. And even though both of these could have the same exact return, they feel completely different to live through. And what we can do is measure how wide these swings are around that average. That's what we call volatility or standard deviation. It's just a way of measuring how smooth or how bumpy the ride is. Clearly, higher volatility doesn't mean higher return. It just means a bumpier ride. So now that we understand that, let's look at how different portfolios compare. Not just on return, but on how much volatility it takes to get there. This chart shows us the relationship all in one spot. Each dot represents a portfolio. The higher the dot is on the chart, the higher the return. Now, if we look at the extremes, this makes sense. The conservative portfolio sits lower on the chart and further to the left, lower return, but a smoother ride. The aggressive portfolio is higher up, but also further to the right, higher return, but much more volatility. Again, nothing surprising here so far. Here's where it gets interesting. Look at the two balanced portfolios. They're both supposed to be doing a similar job, but they're not delivering on the same experience or the same outcome. This one here has a higher return and it's doing it with slightly less volatility. And that's really the goal, not just to maximize the return, but to minimize volatility while doing so. Because the best portfolio isn't the one with the highest return. It's the one that gives you the best return for the ride you're willing to take. And then we have a third piece of the puzzle, cost, because fees matter. They're a drag on performance over time. But here's where it gets nuanced. If two portfolios deliver a return that is similar and with similar risk, then lower cost wins every time. But if one portfolio delivers a better risk-adjusted outcome, smoother ride, smaller drawdowns, then sometimes paying a little more actually makes sense. So it's not just about paying less, it's about paying for what you value. Because a portfolio that looks great on paper is pretty useless if you can't stick with it when things get difficult. A good portfolio looks good on a chart, but a great portfolio is one that you can actually live with. So this becomes a question of value, not just what you pay, but what you get in return. And as my dad used to say, you're worrying about mice in the basement when there's elephants on the roof. If you haven't had this kind of analysis done for you before, we'd be happy to do it for you. You can send us your statements by using the email address below. We'll walk through the exact same process that we covered today. We'll show you how your portfolio has performed over time, how it compares to other portfolios with similar risk profiles, and how it falls from market highs during market declines, and how much volatility you're taking on to achieve your return. In other words, you'll get a clear, complete picture of how you're actually invested and whether there are better ways to achieve your investment goals. There's no cost and no obligation, just better insight and peace of mind. If that sounds helpful to you, click on the link below to get started. It's one of the many ways that we help you to live for today while planning for a better tomorrow.